What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another edition of the 415ers podcast on the Audacy Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. That's Marc Grandi. I'm Evan Giddings, coming at you twice a week here in the off season, just a little under a week away as you're listening to this on Tuesday. From training camp for the veterans. They
Mm.
report on July 25th. We're going to be having a lot of training camp coverage coming your way, courtesy of the Audacy app as well as 95.7 The Game YouTube channel. Subscribe, download, rate both. Mark, we got some interesting comments from the weekend from a couple of 49ers legends. I know we're also going to get into a former 49er quarterback that kind of had some commentary on the mindset of Brock Purdy that I thought was pretty interesting. But before we do all that, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I know we're going to get into what was said on the pod last week, which was, of course, Ross Tucker, Audacy NFL insider, said some really interesting things about the 49ers quarterbacks. I was really sad I couldn't be here for that. I was off work last week, enjoying some time with family up in Santa Cruz, and I didn't really fully understand the situation I was getting myself into. Don't get me wrong, it was a great time. But I was kind of up in the mountains, more in the middle of nowhere than I was expecting, and the Wi-Fi and the cell service was really bad. So it made appearing on the podcast impossible. But it worked out well because you got Ross Tucker on. It was a really great conversation. I listened as I drove back over the weekend back into San Francisco. A really interesting conversation. But overall, I'm feeling good. I'm excited for training camp. I'm feeling refreshed after a week off, but I'm ready to dive back into this. Let's get into it. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Yeah, nothing to complain about. Ended up working out last week with Ross being able to join us. It just so happened that that was the week that you were out of range, but
Yep.
no harm, no foul. And I didn't realize that Ross was going to say some incendiary things according to social media. And for those that haven't heard it, it's on 95.7 The Game's channel. It's also on the 415ers social media pages. Feel free to subscribe and follow us while you're there as well. I didn't really necessarily disagree with anything that he was saying, but people took to the streets and took to Twitter, and any anti Trey Lance perceived slander seems to just be throwing people into a tizzy. And so Ross Tucker, our Odyssey NFL insider, who was so kind to join us on last week's episode, basically said that from anyone you talk to, it sounds like they like Trey Lance, or sorry, they sounds like the 49ers like Sam Darnold more than they like Trey Lance, and that was clearly not what people wanted to hear, Mark.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you. I don't really find much to disagree with there. He thinks the 49ers have soured on Trey Lance, and it seems that considering all the evidence that is most likely true. And one of the things that he threw out was, well, you consider the money that they're paying Sam Darnold. And that's been something that we have brought up a number of times this offseason. One, the money. Two, just the guy, who he is. He's been a starter in the past. And then three, how quickly it happened in free agency. That's a big part of this conversation. But listening to Ross talk about it, Evan, it just kind of, I don't know, popped into my mind regarding Trey Lance and regarding Sam Darnold. I know he also went on to say that he thinks if Brock Purdy wasn't able to play, they would be starting Sam Darnold, which I think is probably more likely than anything else. But when it simply comes to the money, Evan, for the 49ers, who we know are already not necessarily cash strapped, I wouldn't say that, but they're certainly watching where they're spending their money because they have so many big contracts. They have a big contract upcoming for Nick Bosa, which will likely happen soon. Training camp, again, as you mentioned, opens next week. This is usually around when these things happen for the 49ers. They will not let it wait. At least they don't want to let it wait until preseason, and maybe you have Bosa holding out, whatever the situation is. That's going to be coming soon. But I say all of that. The 49ers are watching how and where they're spending their money. Was last year's experience for the 49ers, Evan? Because I think this conversation around Darnold and Lance can come down to this. Was last year's experience for the 49ers regarding the injuries to their quarterback position? They went through four quarterbacks, got into a fifth, and, then things were terrible in the NFC Championship game. Was that experience enough for them to convince them to spend more on a third string quarterback than they would have liked to in the future or like in the past, that they would have been willing to be comfortable spending on a third quarterback, because last year it was going to be Brock Purdy that was their third quarterback. Remember, there was Nate Sudfeld who was going to be the backup. Then the whole Jimmy Garoppolo thing happened. Sudfeld was cut. Purdy proved that he was better than Sudfeld, so on and so forth. It, falling in that Sudfeld lane would be Brandon Allen, who you would think of as more of a quote unquote normal third string quarterback. But now it's either Trey Lance or Sam Darnold. Was last year's experience for the 49ers just purely on an injury related basis? Was that enough for them to say, we can't let that happen again? Therefore, we're going to spend more on our third string quarterback. Maybe it's Sam Darnold. Or is this just simply, as Ross Tucker put it, the 49ers souring on Trey Lance and then the 49ers figuring, well, we need a better second string quarterback? Where's that level? I'm not sure exactly how much last year's experience is impacting their decision when it comes to the money that they're spending in the quarterback room.
And I think that's why this training camp is going to be so interesting. I mean, for a myriad of reasons, but particularly the quarterback. And we're talking about the backup quarterback because, again, at this point, Brock Purdy has not been cleared for week 1 of the NFL season. And that's the question that everyone seems to be asking. Why do you care about who the backup is? Why do you care about who the third string quarterback is? Well, because clearly the 49ers do, because
Yes.
clearly Kyle Shanahan does. And that is the monetary, symbol of $3.5 or $4 million for a third string quote unquote quarterback. That is a lot of money. And I haven't done a double check, but I would venture to guess that at the beginning of this season, that if Sam Darnold is the third string quarterback, he will be the highest paid last quarterback on a roster. That's just the reality. And he's already making more money than the guy who's supposed to start, Brock Purdy, because his annual value is essentially the league minimum. So right now, I think Ross Tucker, and look, he also he didn't he didn't like take a step back from his comments, but he also mentioned throughout the episode how much he hopes that Trey Lance is able to win that
Yeah.
second job because of the potential surrounding him and also I don't want to say near necessity, but the want of a lot of people just to see what he has in case there is a reason to go to a backup quarterback. Where I completely, I guess, would move away from that is I just believe that Kyle Shanahan is more into knowing what he has, even if that isn't the I guess best choice, because this roster I think he feels like is safe enough to win football games with an adequate, even mediocre quarterback under center. And in my opinion, Sam Darnold is just that. He's mediocre, but we know he's mediocre. We don't know if Trey Lance is mediocre. He could be great. He also could be 5 feet below sea level. So we don't exactly have a clue of what that production is going to look like. And that's why I feel like Kyle Shanahan is erring towards Sam Darnold and might even give him the edge in a couple of preseason games because we're going to have to decide who the first string is, who's getting first string reps. And I think things are trending towards Sam Darnold being given an equal opportunity at that spot as the guy everybody wants, Trey Lance.
That's interesting. I think I'm more of the belief, and maybe this is again just cynical me sticking out. I think I tend to be that way, at least when it relates to the 49ers quarterback room. I tend to believe Kyle Shanahan feels like he has a pretty good idea what he has in Trey Lance, and as a result, isn't too happy with it. I don't think it's a case of, and again, I could be totally wrong here. I don't think it's a case of, I know what Sam Darnold is. I am unsure of what Trey Lance is, despite the fact that what we know about Sam Darnold isn't all too pleasing. I'm going to roll with that. If Trey Lance was still a giant question mark, and again, that doesn't mean you expect him to be good, or on the flip side, you expect him to be bad. But if he was still a major question mark in Kyle Shanahan's mind, like a true unknown, I think he would try to figure out what that guy was, that guy being Trey Lance, over maybe relying on still a younger guy, but a journeyman a bit who has some experience in this league, but really has failed at all of his stops. to me, Evan, and I guess I'll just ask you directly, because to me, I feel like Kyle Shanahan has a good sense, at least in his mind. He thinks he knows what Trey Lance is, and the result isn't positive. His outcome wasn't positive, which can explain all of the moves the 49ers have made this season. I know you kind of mentioned this just a moment ago, but I want to ask to make sure I get the answer from you directly. Do you think that the 49ers don't know what Trey Lance is as a quarterback at this level?
I don't think there's any way they can. Just because of the injuries that he had that derailed last season, the injuries that even hurt potentially the taking off platform for him during his rookie season, but also the fact that he has just simply not played that many snaps under center since he was in high school. He played one full season of college football. I believe it to be more valuable than maybe others do, even if it's at an FCS level, but that's one season of football
I'm
in the
with you.
last now 4 years. So, no, I don't think they know what they have in Trey Lance because there's no possible way.
I feel that way, but I think the 49ers are like, well, what we've seen from him, the limited game action, but in practice, year in, year out, week in, week out, I don't know. I feel like they're not feeling it. Now, I could be way wrong on that. I don't know.